This peculiar little building is known as Shane's Castle. It's probably a toll gate, toll house, and it was built circa 1840, 1850. I don't know when that particular picture was taken, but not recently, I'd suggest. The road on the left is the A361, which takes you to Bath, and the road on the right is the main road to Chippenham. So this is how you get in and out of Devizes. So it's a very busy position. But you will note in this picture the nature of transport is a horse and cart. So this building is slap bang on a junction of two very busy roads. It's actually on the road and it doesn't know what's about to hit it. And that's something that can be taken literally. Here it is today, literally this morning. It's a Sunday and it's enjoying a brief respite from traffic. Proximity of this building to the road is having one major and another significant impact on the building. The first one is attritional. It is hit, I suspect, quite often by large vehicles, leaving some score marks higher up the building, and you can see it there at the top of the picture, and more regularly by low-level brushes by cars. So this will be wearing the surface of the stone out inevitably, and it will also be dislodging it a little bit, loosening mortar joints, etc. And this will make the masonry increasingly prone to damp penetration and general weathering and deterioration, in addition to the inevitability that the odd stone's going to be physically knocked out by a passing vehicle. The loss of the stone surface the building does reveal something about its construction. Stone of this type is very expensive to build with. It needs to be cut, and there's quite a lot of intricacy to this building. In addition, it needs to be imported, so most of the buildings in Devizes were built of brick, and what the loss of stone from the exterior of this building reveals is this one is also substantially built of brick. So the basic structure is brick and the stone is a facing to the exterior of the brickwork. It's basically a method of keeping costs down as far as possible. The secondary problem this building will have with its proximity to the road is that not only will it get wet in any other like any other building does when it rains, and not only will it suffer from rising dampness like any other building built without a damp-proof course, but it will also be getting regularly splashed by passing vehicles. So the amount of moisture which is being piled into those lower walls will be quite considerable. And bearing in mind it's lost its outer skin here and there, it will be prone to significant damp penetration. So I anticipate the interior of this building is very damp indeed. Going along with the splashing of water onto the walls by passing vehicles, one has to consider what happens in the winter. Inevitably, from time to time, the local authority will be spreading salt on the road surface. And when this is dissolved into the water and then splashed onto the walls will be absorbing, I suppose is a better word, a lot of dissolved salt. Then when the walls dry out, this salt is going to crystallise, and these little salt crystals will be forming within the pores of the stone and basically expanding, and they'll be further breaking off bits of surface material. So salt applied to the road surface will be contributing significantly to the deterioration of the masonry, and so basically this property's got a major problem. Ultimately, I suspect the whole town's going to have a major problem, because eventually it's going to be necessary to repair the external walls. I mean, it's necessary now, and I can't see how that's going to be done without partially closing the road for a period of time, and the traffic at this point is bad enough already, so it's going to be a major problem in due course. Here's a collection of buildings which I think probably illustrates a problem that most British towns have these days, and that is that It's the 21st century, but we live in towns built during the 18th and 19th centuries, so they're full of buildings that were built for a purpose which doesn't exist anymore. So what we have here is the what are they called? The law courts and county police offices, later known as the assize courts. The white building is the White Lion pub. Back in, I suppose, 1970s, there was a population of about 10,000 people in Devizes with 25 pubs, and well, they've been dropping like flies ever since. So the number of pubs is much reduced, and the big red brick building at the end of the street there is Wadworth Brewery, and that was still going until very recently. But Wadworths have taken themselves off to a nice modern premises somewhere on the edge of town. So we've got these three buildings with no obvious use, and I think the intention is to convert the law courts into the town museum and the brewery into flats. But this does leave a question mark over the White Line. I don't know what's going to happen to that. The law courts are quasi-dilapidated, which does give us an opportunity to see some of the construction detail. I mean, here you can see that, like Shane's Castle, there's a stone facade onto a brick building. You can get a glimpse of brickwork between the stone there. There are a number of methods of fixing ashlar to a brick backing. So one can only guess at how it's done in this building, but what seems to be a reasonable presumption is that the stone is fixed to the brickwork with metal clamps or hooks. So these will be hooked into the brickwork and then bedded into the stone facing. The problem with that is that given enough years, ferrous metals will corrode. Corrosion rusting involves an expansion process, and this creates forces which are strong enough to break up the stonework. This creates little openings in the wall which can allow rainwater in and create weathering problems. My guess is that's what's happening to this very ragged stone elevation. If we wander down the right side of the building, we can see that where an outbuilding that used to be attached to the side elevation has been knocked out, you can see lots of sockets in the wall, and that exposes some of the brickwork of which the main building is built. This view illustrates the nature of the ashlar used to build the wall. It is very accurately cut and so tightly fitted together it doesn't look like there's any room for mortar at all, so it might be relying entirely on mortar placed behind the block and the any metal brackets that are used to fix it to the brickwork. If we wander around the back of the building, we can see that the use of expensively cut stone has been almost but not quite abandoned, and we're left with a structure that's built entirely out of much, much cheaper brickwork. Immediately opposite the law courts, we have this building, which is Northgate House. There is a blue plaque adjacent to the front door, which I think it says that it's a former coach house, whereas if you look at the Historic England website, it refers to it as Judges' Lodgings. Potentially, judges can lodge in a coach house. I don't know what that means, but that's not really what interests me about this building. It was built at the end of the 18th century, so late 1700s. The bricks to the front elevation are laid in a style known as Flemish bond, so this is bricks laid as stretchers, followed by one turned perpendicularly as a header, then a stretcher, then a header, then a stretcher. This, I understand, was a fairly tedious way of building as far as the builders are concerned, because it's time consuming, but it has an attractive finish, so that's why it was favoured for front elevations. What is also interesting about this building is it has been affected by a little bit of structural movement. You can observe this particularly if you look at that column of windows to the extreme left-hand side of the building. The house is built in a fairly Typical traditional Georgian style. So there are columns of windows stacked directly one above the other, and they're also quite deep from top to bottom. What this results in is that you have columns of masonry, i.e. brick or stone from top to bottom, separated by columns of much lighter materials, i.e. timber and glass. And the result of this is differential settlement. Settlement is the process by which any new building will squash itself into the ground. So, I don't know, put it simply, buildings are heavy and the ground is a little bit spongy. So when you put a building on the ground, it squashes itself in. Now, if in the case of this building you have heavy bits and lighter bits, the heavier bits are going to push themselves down a bit further. And this results in unevenness. So again, if you look at that column of windows to the extreme left side of the building, you can see that they all tilt. The windowsills tilt downwards a little bit from left to right. However, the important thing to remember about settlement is it's a form of movement that occurs immediately after construction, so this building has probably looked that way since almost immediately after it was built. Another interesting observation about this building is that it has been partially repointed. Well, this is obviously a good thing, it's repair and maintenance, but the newly pointed parts have been repointed with a very stark white lime mortar. The result is it looks really rather blotchy, doesn't it? Again, especially to that left-hand side of the building, there's lots of bright white mortar joints and then the duller, older mortar joints. I mean, it's not a bad thing, it just looks a bit unpleasant. And we can compare and contrast it with this next building. This building is located on New Park Street, and it was, as far as we're aware, built in the 1740s. Like the Northgate House, it also needed repointing. But you can't really see it quite so much in this building, and this is because the builder, in agreement I think with the listed buildings officer, decided to add a bit of pink pigment to the mortar. So they added a little bit of pink into the mortar to make it match to an extent with the existing brickwork and mortar. So the net result is a much more it looks nicer, that's what I'm trying to say, it just looks nicer. And next door to that building is the Royal Oak Pub. So this is yet another redundant pub, and that little flat roofed part over there used to be where there was a pool table located, but who wants to go out and drink beer and play pool these days? Lastly, we have this building. Not a great deal of survey interest left in it. It was built at the end of the 1700s and did a couple of 100 years of sterling service, most recently as a kebab shop, before it burnt down in November 2024. So I think the building's pretty much lost, but it looks like there's an effort being made to salvage the front elevation, and somebody's made an excellent job of, what would that be called, scaffolding, bracing the front elevation, and that's being propped up with a load of great big canisters full of liquid, but hopefully in this case not cooking oil. Just to finish off, an unnecessary picture of Devizes, I suppose, taken about 1900, which shows the law courts and the White Lion as a red brick building rather than a painted white one, and the Wadworth Brewery in the background.